Once upon a time, a hen told the most dreadful story ever told. It was so terrible, it made the other hen's feathers stand on end. It's quite true. But let's start at the beginning. One evening, a white-feathered hen was grooming herself and plucked a tiny loose feather out. The more I pluck, the prettier I'll get, she joked, for she was a jolly hen. And then she fluffed up the rest of her feathers, settled down on her perch, and fell fast asleep. But one hen who sat nearby overheard her. She was a rather stupid and noisy bird, and she thought that the little hen was serious. Hopping off her perch, she went and clucked the news to the other hens. It was the juiciest gossip she'd heard all week. Did you hear that? There's a hen here who plans to pluck out all her feathers to look more beautiful. If I were a rooster, I would despise her. Above the hen house was an ancient oak tree. Inside it lived a family of sharp-eared owls who heard every word that the foolish hen had said. They rolled their big round owl eyes in horror. Did you hear what that hen said? Hooted the mother owl. One of the hens has become so crazy that she sits and plucks her feathers out while the rooster watches. Little owls shouldn't hear such dreadful things, the father owl warned. He told the little birds to cover their ears, but it was too late. They rolled their eyes and flapped their wings at the shocking news. The mother owl was determined to share the shocking news with her neighbors. I must go tell the pigeons, she hooted. They won't believe it. So she swooped across the road to the pigeon house, where all the pigeons were nesting down for the night. She told them all about what she'd heard from the hen house. It's quite true. She must be freezing. The pigeons were just as scandalized by the rumor. They flew into the farmyard to tell the rest of the poultry about the vain hens. Coo, they squawked. The hens in the hen house are plucking out all their feathers to attract the rooster's attention. The rooster heard this just as he was waking up. He was still half asleep, but the news was enough to shock him into action. He flew up onto the fence to proclaim the day's news. Cock-a-doodle-doo, he crowed. 3 hens have died of a broken heart, all for the sake of a rooster. They've plucked all their feathers out. What a dreadful tale. He crowed so loud that a family of bats overheard him. They swung down from the belfry and began their own broadcast. Tell it everywhere, they shrieked. The hens clucked and the owls hooted, the pigeons cooed and the rooster squawked. The whole farmyard echoed with the scandal of the vain, feather-plucking hens. And the story was carried from hen house to hen house, from farm to farm, right across the country. He'd finally arrived back at the very same place it had started. There are 5 hens heartbroken over a rooster who have plucked out all their feathers to show who had lost the most weight. Then they pecked one another to death to the shame of their families. What vain and silly birds they are. Can you believe it? The jolly white hen who had lost the tiny feather clucked her disapproval. She didn't even recognize her own story. What a dreadful tale! I despise such hens, but their story should not be hushed up. It should be published in the newspapers and serve them right. And so the story was printed in the newspapers and known all over the kingdom. Everyone marvelled at the silly hens, so vain that they would pluck their own feathers out. And that's how one tiny feather can grow to become 5 hens. It's quite true.
Once upon a time, in the bitter cold of the last night of the year, a wee girl walked through the darkening streets. She was all alone. Snow whirled all about, falling on her bare head, chilling her beneath her thin, ragged clothes. The girl had worn her mother's shoes when she had left the house, but now her feet were bare. The shoes were too big and had fallen off as she ran across the road, when 2 carriages rattled by dreadfully fast. A boy ran off with one shoe, and the other she could not find. So she wandered on her weary way, her tiny feet frozen by the cold cobblestones. She carried matches for sale in her apron, and held a box of them in her hand. But no one had bought any all day long, or given her a single penny. The girl shivered with cold and hunger as she walked past houses where other children were safe and warm in bed. Fires burned brightly for hogmanay, and there was a wonderful smell of roast goose. Soon she could go on no longer. She was so tired. She grew colder and colder, but couldn't return home with nothing for her parents. They had no fire and no food. The wind whistled through their leaky roof, and their blankets were damp and threadbare. The wee maid came to a narrow alleyway between 2 houses, where there was a shelter from the biting wind. She sat down, huddled into a shivering ball. Her hands were numb with cold. She rubbed them to try and get some feeling back, then wondered if the light of a match might warm them. She took one from her bundle and struck it. It burst into a tiny bright flame, like a little candle. She warmed her hands over it. All at once it seems as though she was sitting before a big fireplace filled with crackling logs. The smell of juniper and pine smoke curled through the air. For a moment she felt warmth and comfort. And then the match died and the fireplace faded away. She struck another. It flared up, and when its light fell upon the wall, it became transparent like a window. She could see inside the house. On the table, a snow-white cloth was spread, with silver dishes and crystal glasses. A roast goose sat in the middle, stuffed with apples and dried plums. To her astonishment, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled over towards her. But just as it reached her, the match went out, and the wonderful room vanished. The girl lit a third match. Suddenly, she was sitting under a glittering Christmas tree, the most beautiful she had ever seen. Thousands of candles burned on its branches, and gold and silver baubles shone there like jewels. She reached out her hands towards them. But the match flame flickered out, and the tree lights rose up into the air, becoming stars. One shot across the sky in a long trail of fire. Someone is dying, thought the wee girl. Her old grandmother had once told her that when a star fell down to earth, a soul rose to heaven. She struck a fourth match, and in its glow, her grandmother appeared, clear and shining. She had died years ago, but in the magic light she stood there, as kind and lovely as the girl remembered. "Oh, grandmother, please take me with you," she cried. "I know you will disappear when this match burns out, just like the fireplace and the roast goose and the Christmas tree." Quickly, she struck the whole bundle of matches to try and keep her grandmother with her. The light was so brilliant it seemed brighter than the sun. Her grandmother reached out to her. She took the wee maid by the hand. They flew together up into the sky, into the stars, where she was no longer cold and no longer hungry. The next day, at the cold hour of dawn, passers-by found the poor girl in the alleyway. At first they thought she was asleep, for there was a rosy glow in her cheeks and she seemed to be smiling. But they could not wake her. She was stiff and cold, frozen to death in the winter's night. She still held her matches, of which one bundle was all burned up. The New Year's morning sun shone on her wee face. She only wanted to warm herself, the people said. If only we had shown her some kindness and welcomed her into our homes or bought her matches. But it was too late. No one would ever know the beautiful things she had seen, or that her grandmother had come to lead her away from the dark and the cold, or that the wee match girl was the first that new year to cross the threshold to a warmer and happier place, a land of stars and everlasting joy.
Once upon a time, there were two children who lived next door to each other in a big city crowded with houses and people. They shared a tiny garden made of a window box where a rose bush bloomed until winter froze it away. Not far away, there was an evil hobgoblin who had a magic mirror. Everything beautiful that it reflected looked ugly, while hideous things looked wonderful. The hobgoblin flew into the sky with his mirror, but it slipped from his hands and smashed into millions of sharp splinters. They fell on the earth below. One wintry night, the boy, Kay, looked out of his window. Amid the whirling snow, he saw a tall woman, graceful and beautiful, who beckoned to him. But she was made of shining, glittering ice. He was frightened and hid under his warm blankets. Next summer, the rose bush bloomed again, and the girl, Gerda, sang a song beside it. When roses bloom so sweetly in the vale, the Snow Queen's evil power at last will fail. As Kay played nearby, he suddenly cried out in pain, "Oh, something hurt my heart, and there's something in my eye." Gerda tried to comfort him. They did not know that the splinters of the evil mirror had pierced him and would soon turn his heart to ice. As time passed, Kay grew cruel and rude and shunned his former playmate. One day he was riding his sled when he saw a magnificent white sleigh arrive. "That will go much faster than my sled," he thought, and jumped on the back. But the sleigh took off, faster and faster, flying through the snow. Kay was terrified. Finally, it stopped, and the driver stood up and turned to him. A tall figure, wearing a white fur coat and a cap made of snow. It was the Snow Queen. "Are you trembling from cold?" she asked him. She kissed his forehead, and for a moment he felt as though he was dying. Then he felt comfortable and realized he no longer felt the cold. The Snow Queen kissed him again, and he forgot Gerda, his parents, and his home. They flew away over forests and lakes, over many a land and sea. Below them the wind blew cold, and wolves howled. But up above, the moon shone bright and large, and Kay fixed his eyes on it throughout the long winter night. By day, he slept at the feet of the Snow Queen. Back home, Gerda searched everywhere for Kay. The snow melted and spring came, but there was no sign of him. So Gerda set off from her home to find him. Her journey first took her to a witch who lived in an enchanted flower garden. The witch wanted to keep Gerda and cast a spell of forgetfulness. But the witch was worried that her roses might remind the girl of Kay, so she pointed her crooked stick, and they sank down into the black earth. Held under a spell, Gerda stayed there. But one day, a sadness came into her heart, and her tears fell onto the earth, awakening the rosebush. As it bloomed before her, Gerda suddenly remembered everything. Kay isn't dead, the roses told her. We have been down in the earth where the dead people are, but Kay is not there. A crow flew into the garden. I think I have seen Kay, he said. He's now a prince, married to a princess in this very kingdom. Gerda went to visit the royal palace. But although the prince looked like Kay, it was not him. The princess was moved by Gerda's plight and gave her a golden carriage to help her with her journey. The carriage rolled on into a dark forest, where it was soon surrounded by robbers. They seized the horses and killed the coachman and dragged poor Gerda out. How tender she looks, they cried. What a dainty dish she will be. They kept her to fatten her up for their cooking pot, but a young robber girl took pity on her. Her name was Bay, and she had a pet reindeer. That night, while the robbers danced around their fire, some wood pigeons flew by. Kuroo! We have seen Kay, they told Gerda. He flew away with the Snow Queen to Lapland. Bay's reindeer spoke. The Snow Queen only lives in Lapland in summer. Her stronghold is a castle near the North Pole on the island called Spitsbergen. So Gerda travelled north on the reindeer's back. First she came to the hut of the Lapp woman who was cooking fish over a whale oil lamp. The Snow Queen is hundreds of miles to the north, the Lapp woman told her. Gerda travelled on to the hut of the Finn woman, who had mystical knowledge. While Gerda slept, the Finn woman spoke to the reindeer. Little Kay has splinters of glass in his heart and his eye. He will not be human until they are removed, she said. Can't you give Gerda a magic spell to give her more power than the Snow Queen? The reindeer asked. No power that I could give her could be as great as the innocence of her own heart. Don't you see how wise men and beasts are compelled to serve her, and how far she has come? The wise old Finn woman said. Gerda and the reindeer rode on to the Snow Queen's castle. It was defended by monstrous soldiers formed of snowflakes. They looked like snakes, bears, and porcupines. But Gerda said a prayer, and her frozen breath turned into angels who melted the snowflakes away. The walls of the castle were made of snowdrifts, and its vast, empty halls were lit by the flare of the northern lights. In the center was a frozen lake where the Snow Queen sat with Kay at her feet. Kay was nearly blue with the cold, though he did not feel it, as his heart had nearly turned to ice. I am going to visit volcanoes in the hot countries, the Snow Queen told him, and flew away. Gerda found Kay there, alone, stiff and still, nearly frozen to death. She threw her arms around him, and her warm tears fell over him, going straight to his heart. They burned away the icy splinter there. When roses bloom so sweetly in the vale, the Snow Queen's evil power at last will fail, Gerda sang. Kay cried out in happiness, "My beloved Gerda, where have you been for so long? And where have I been? How cold and empty it is here." Hand in hand, they left the wintry castle. As they journeyed south, the bitter wind died down, and the sun shone out. Green buds were all around them in the forest, and birds sang. As Kay and Gerda reached home, they had forgotten the Snow Queen, as though she was nothing but a bad dream. Everything seemed just as it was. But when they entered the door, they realized they were no longer children, but grown up. So they sat by their rose bush, grown up, but still children at heart. And it was summer, warm, glorious summer.
Once upon a time, the Emperor of China lived in the most beautiful palace in the whole world. The palace was built of porcelain, and in its gardens were exotic flowers hung with silver bells. Everyone noticed them when they walked by. Nearby was a dark forest that sloped down to the sea, where ships passed under the branches of trees. In the trees lived a nightingale with a song so exquisite that even the busy fishermen stopped to listen. The bird's fame grew. Travellers to the kingdom praised its song more highly than the emperor's palace. They wrote books and poems about the nightingale in the forest by the sea. The emperor read one of these books and demanded to see the nightingale. "Bring him to my palace. He will sing for me tonight," he commanded. But his courtiers had no idea where the bird was. Eventually, they found a little kitchen maid who said she would take them to it. The kitchen maid led them through the forest to a very tall tree. There, in the highest branches, was a small grey bird. "Little Nightingale, will you sing for the Emperor?" the kitchen maid asked. "I would be delighted," the bird said, and began to sing. He flew down from his perch, "But my song sounds best in the woods." Back at the palace, the nightingale sang so sweetly that tears fell from the Emperor's eyes. He sang even more beautifully, and the Emperor's heart melted. He offered the bird his own golden slipper as a present. But the nightingale said that seeing tears in the Emperor's eyes was the greatest reward. The Emperor commanded that the nightingale should stay at court and have his own cage. He was allowed to go for a walk twice a day and once at night, accompanied by 12 footmen. But they tied ribbons to his legs to stop him flying away, so the poor nightingale was trapped and miserable. One day, the Emperor received a large parcel. Inside was a golden clockwork nightingale studded with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. When wound up with a key, it wagged its glittering tail and sang one of the nightingale's songs. The Emperor ordered the birds to sing together, but it didn't work, because the real nightingale sang whatever song he liked, while the clockwork bird had only one song. But he was so pretty with his jewels that they made him sing it 30 times. When the clockwork bird finally stopped, the Emperor discovered that the real nightingale had flown out of the window. He had returned to his forest home. "What an ungrateful bird!" the courtiers said. So they made the clockwork bird sing again and again, always the same song. It was given a cushion beside the Emperor's bed. They titled it "Grand Imperial Singer of the Emperor to Sleep." The palace music master even arranged for the bird to give a concert. It sang perfectly, but some fishermen who heard it were disappointed. "There's something lacking," they said. After a year, the Emperor, his courtiers, and all the people knew every trill of the song by heart. The whole country rejoiced at the clockwork nightingale's music. They loved to sing the song themselves. But then, disaster struck. One night, while mid-song, there was a twang and a whirr, and the bird broke down. The music stopped. A watchmaker was called to repair the bird, but he said its cogs and wheels were badly worn. If he replaced them, it would spoil the tune. So from now on, the bird must only sing once a year. 5 years went by and the whole country was in sorrow. The Emperor fell ill and it was feared he would die. He lay stiff and pale in his magnificent bed with velvet curtains and gold tassels. The moonlight streamed through the open window onto the Emperor and his broken clockwork bird. And the Emperor thought that he saw Death sitting on his bed, wearing the Emperor's crown and wielding his golden sword and banner. Strange and terrible faces appeared around the bed. whispering the emperor's deeds, both good and bad. "Sing, my precious golden bird, sing!" he cried. "Drown out these awful voices!" But the bird stood silent. There was no one to wind it or make it sing. Death kept staring at the emperor with cold, hollow eyes. Meanwhile, the phantom faces continued their terrible whispering. Suddenly, a beautiful burst of song came through the open window. It was the real Nightingale who had returned. He sang of comfort and hope. The phantom faces grew pale and started to fade away. As they did, the emperor felt blood beginning to flow more quickly through his veins again. "Sing on, little Nightingale," said Death. "I will give the emperor his crown, sword and banner back for a song." So the Nightingale sang of the quiet churchyard where white roses grow, with green grass wet with the tears of the living. Death longed for his garden. He drifted away through the window as a cold, grey mist. The phantom faces vanished, and the emperor was strong and well once more. "How can I ever repay you?" the emperor said to the Nightingale. "You have already repaid me," the bird replied. "I saw the tears in your eyes the first time I sang." The emperor wanted the bird to stay with him always, but the Nightingale refused. "I cannot build my nest here or live in a palace. I will visit your window and sing to you of everything in your kingdom. But you must promise not to tell anyone that a little bird comes and sings to you." When the courtiers came in to look after their dead emperor, they were amazed to see him standing up, healthy and well. From then on, the Nightingale sang to him of his people, those who were happy and those who needed help. And the emperor became a better and more beloved ruler.